Some places feel like they exist just outside of reality, places that are strange and remote and impossible to forget. It's time for another side quest. But if you don't like isolation or clowns, you might want to stay home. Come on, it's time to make the cut. The Fisch Cut. I'm leaving Las Vegas, but I'm not headed home just yet. One more road trip before driving back to Southern California. This next destination isn't on the way home. It's somewhere in the empty Nevada desert, along Interstate 95 and a little over a 3-hour drive from Las Vegas. And there are some interesting alien-themed locations along the way, as there are many reports of UFO sightings around these desolate roads, and we are pretty close to the infamous extraterrestrial highway that leads to Area 51. But we're just passing through, on our way to one of the strangest roadside attractions in the country, the Clown Motel in Tonopah. Yeah, I'm not really sure if that's the correct pronunciation of the town, as some locals say Tonopah and others say Tonopah. Whatever the case, this is a motel filled wall to wall with thousands of clowns, built directly beside an old cemetery in one of Nevada's most historic mining towns. And for some reason, I decided to spend the night here. Before we get into the motel itself, though, you kind of have to understand Tonopah. Tonopah was founded in the early 1900s during Nevada's massive silver mining boom. Legend says a prospector named Jim Butler discovered silver here after chasing a runaway burro into the hills. And almost overnight, Tonopah exploded into one of the richest mining towns in the American West. At its peak, the town was filled with miners, gamblers, railroad crews, saloon workers, and fortune seekers all chasing wealth beneath the desert floor. Tonopah became so successful, it earned the nickname the Queen of the Silver Camps. But mining towns came with danger. Cave-ins, disease, violence, harsh winters, deadly working conditions underground, and many people who came to Tonopah never left. Even today, abandoned mining tunnels and shafts still exist beneath parts of the town. Now, Tonopah is considered one of Nevada's most haunted towns, not just the Clown Motel, but the old mining area, cemetery, abandoned buildings, and the Mitzvah Hotel as well. At night, Tonopah feels strangely frozen in time, partly because of the old mining history, and partly because of the isolation. It's one of the darkest towns in America, with almost no light pollution, making it an ideal location for stargazing. Once the sun goes down, the desert becomes incredibly quiet, and honestly, that silence makes places like this feel even stranger. That's where the old Tonopah Cemetery comes in. The cemetery dates back to the early 1900s and contains the graves of miners, children, and victims of Tonopah's rough early years. The cemetery is obviously a sacred place, so I'm going to be respectful as I walk around. And since I'm going to be sleeping in the Clown Motel next door tonight, I really don't want to wake anybody up right now. One of the most famous tragedies happened in 1911 when a fire broke out deep inside the Belmont mine, killing 17 miners underground. Many of those miners were buried here. What if?
Looking for me?
Directly beside the cemetery sits the Clown Motel. Not nearby, not down the road, literally right beside it. The Clown Motel originally opened in 1985. And strangely enough, it didn't actually begin as a horror attraction. The motel was founded by Leona and Leroy David. Their father, Clarence David, loved collecting clown figurines and was buried in the cemetery next door. After his death, the family used his clown collection to decorate the motel as a tribute to him. Which honestly makes this place even stranger, because underneath all the horror branding, the motel originally started as something personal, a memorial. But over time, the clown collection kept growing. Hundreds became thousands. Clown dolls, paintings, statues, vintage circus clowns, antique figures, horror-themed clowns, and eventually people online started noticing. Paranormal investigators visited, ghost hunters started filming here, horror YouTubers turned it into an American roadside legend, and slowly the Clown Motel transformed from a weird stop in the Nevada desert into one of the most famous horror destinations in America. Some guests claim they've heard whispers late at night, seen figures near the cemetery, or experienced strange activity inside the rooms. Whether any of this is true probably depends on how comfortable you are sleeping beside a cemetery surrounded by thousands of clowns. Clowns are supposed to make people laugh, but for a lot of people, they do the exact opposite. Psychologists think part of the fear comes from uncertainty. Clowns hide their real facial expressions beneath makeup. Their smiles are frozen. Their emotions become impossible to fully read. Your brain recognizes something human, but something feels off. That discomfort even has a name: coulrophobia, the fear of clowns. And pop culture definitely didn't help. Movies like It, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and decades of horror films transformed clowns from entertainers into nightmare fuel for every generation. So naturally, someone built an entire motel dedicated to them in the middle of the desert. So with all of that in mind, it's time to check into room 107, the Fear Unlimited room. Let's do a quick tour before we settle in. The Clown Motel has rooms showcasing different horror themes that can be reserved, including Halloween, Friday the 13th, It, and Chucky. I chose this one because it looked the scariest. Allegedly, 107 was closed for the last few years after a couple of deaths occurred in the room. It was used as storage, and guests in the room next door regularly heard strange things like furniture moving and banging on the walls. You know, nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe there are some anxious spirits or demons attached to the sinister clowns and monsters downing the walls throughout the room. And they are everywhere, including the bathroom. You really can't look anywhere without something evil looking, laughing, and staring back at you. Aside from their horrific nature, the art is pretty extraordinary and the colors are vibrant, like you'd expect from a clown. I guess I'm about to find out if I'm really as alone in this room as I am in the motel. Oh yeah, and the cemetery is just a short walk away. And eventually the lights must go out, but the clowns remain. Only they glow in the dark under the black lights positioned throughout the room. I'm not sure I want to turn everything off though, as my imagination will probably go wild, knowing that these things are lurking just a few feet away. I'm going to set up my camera in the dark while I'm attempting to sleep to see if we have any paranormal visitors. Falling asleep in a room with walls covered with glowing-eyed clowns staring at me from the darkness wasn't easy, but the complete silence was even more chilling. I'm sure you don't want to watch me while I'm sleeping, as that would be just as creepy, so let's speed this part up. Well, no visitations that I'm aware of, but I didn't get very much sleep. Maybe it was all of the frightening clowns watching me. Maybe it's the fact that the motel is empty and there's no cell service in this area. Maybe the spirits are just afraid of me. Whatever the case, the next morning, I left Tonopah with mixed feelings. Part of the Clown Motel feels cheesy. Part of it feels genuinely unsettling. The most interesting part of the Clown Motel isn't whether it's haunted, it's that something originally built from family grief slowly evolved into a globally recognized symbol of fear. And part of it just feels like classic Americana. One of those strange roadside places that could only exist somewhere along a lonely desert highway. Tonopah and the Clown Motel tap into something uniquely American. Nostalgia, desert location, roadside oddities, curiosity and fear. It survives because people want places like this to exist. And maybe that's why places like this matter. Travel isn't always about luxury resorts or famous landmarks. Sometimes it's about experiencing places that make you uncomfortable, places that make you curious, or places that force you to confront why certain things scare us in the first place. Because sometimes The strangest places end up telling us the most about ourselves. And somewhere out there in the Nevada desert, beneath some of the darkest skies in America, the clowns are still waiting. I'm Brian, and this is the Fisch Cut.